Welcome to All Israel News. I'm Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem, and joining me today is Yehudah Glick, a former member of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, a religious Jewish man, an Israeli born in the United States, Brooklyn, I believe, and made Aliyah a number of years ago, and one of the leading activists saying that it's time for Israelis, Jews, and Christians to be able to pray on the Temple Mount, and eventually to rebuild the temple itself. Yehudah, you're a controversial man, but you've become a friend, and I'm fascinated with your perspective, and thank you for speaking to All Israel News right here on the eve of the high holidays.
Shalom, Joel, and first of all, congratulations on the All Israel News, and I wish you success because we really need all people's news. And that's what we're going for. So as you mentioned, I today lead the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation, which believes not what we believe. It's pretty much what the Bible teaches us, that the Temple Mount is the place that God chose to dwell His presence eternally, and He wants the place to be a house of prayer for all nations. As you know, God created all man in His image, and He is the God of all, one and only God. And therefore, the place that He chose as His palace should be a house of prayer for all nations. And that is definitely what we're trying to promote, calling people not only to pray on the Temple Mount, to worship God, like these days where we came out with a campaign, let the shofar blow on the Temple Mount, let the shofar blow on Zion, because your name is Joel, and you probably recall very well the prophecy of Joel. He's talking about an unprecedented crisis. In his time, it was locusts. In our time, it's COVID-19. And he says, blow the shofar on Zion. And that's what he's calling for, and that's exactly what we are calling for, that Zion should be a world center, a world for peace, world center for prayer, world center for the Word of God.
So let's separate out the two big questions. Again, as we head into the Jewish high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, obviously Yom Kippur, and the rest, let's deal first with the issue of that Jews and Christians are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Let's deal with that first. Then let's also talk about a question that I get asked wherever I travel. Christians ask me this, not as much as they used to, but they still ask me a lot. When will there be a temple? And it's a hugely controversial question, but you're the expert on it. So let's start with the fact that under the current agreement between Israel and the Kingdom of Jordan, under the Waqf, which is the Islamic charity that sort of runs the day-to-day activities on the Temple Mount, the agreement is that there can be nobody can pray or read their own holy book other than a Muslim.
Let's make a little organize the data. First of all, the Temple Mount is under the sovereignty of Israel. When we're referring to anything to do with security. When it's talking about the religious authority on Temple Mount, presently, unfortunately, the Israelis supposedly agreed, ever since the Six-Day War, that they would be allowed freedom for everybody to walk around there, but freedom for religious work would only be for Muslims. And this is something that we are definitely trying to change. Because there's no reason in the world why in 2019, 800,000 non-Muslim tourists visited Temple Mount. And why, if a tourist comes to Israel from all over the world, he comes to walk in the land of the Bible, he goes in the footsteps of the prophets of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, King David, you name it. And when he gets to the temple, he can't hold his Bible in his hand. He can't hold the prayer book. And this is something we definitely would like to change. Unfortunately, this is something that has been like this for several years. But right now, especially when we're talking about a new horizon in the Middle East, when we see Israel making peace with the United Arab Emirates as one opening to the Arab world, and we're talking about turning the Temple Mount into allowing people to come from all over the world to pray. So why should people who are not Muslim not be included? The Temple Mount is holy for Jews. It's holy for Christians. It's the first, second temple stood there. Jesus, according to Christian faith, came there, turned over the tables, and many other. I mean, anybody who reads the Bible knows that the holiest place in the world where half of the book of Psalms is referring to Zion, the holy mountain. There is no reason in the world why people who are not Muslim should not be able to pray there. And it's supposed to be the world center for tolerance, for inclusiveness, and not a world center for incitement and hate. And that's what we are trying to do. We, as I said, the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation, we are doing all we can to turn the place into a place of inclusiveness, of respecting one another, of respecting the difference of one another's, and allowing people to pray in their way to the one and only God. And I think that this is something that definitely people who live in the West and understand what Western liberal values include: justice, freedom, liberty. There's no reason in the world why we can not pray there. And I can say that we've seen a major change in the past. Anytime anybody who was not Muslim would move his lips, immediately would be arrested. Today, there's a lot of they allow us, I would say, to pray, but not to demonstrate prayer, not to pray out loud, not to organize groups of prayer, and not to hold a prayer book or a Bible in your hand. And as I said, and not to blow the shofar, which is such a symbol of the Jubilee, freedom, liberty. It's the symbol of the word of God from Mount Sinai. It's the symbol of coroning God, as in Psalm 47 talks about the coronation of God by all nations on Zion. So there's no reason in the world.
Okay. I appreciate it. Now you're going into a sermon, so let me just ask a couple more questions. I appreciate it. Look, I've been on the Temple Mount even in this past year, pre-COVID, and I actually saw Israeli police bringing religious Jews up to the Mount and praying. It didn't get a lot of attention, but I've seen that happen several times. So I think there is something going on.
Yes.
Religious Jews do a little bit more, but
anybody who follows our YouTube page or Facebook page of the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation, you can see that things have changed. I can tell you that when I started going up to Temple Mount in 1989, they were allowing Jews one at a time. So now they're allowing much bigger groups. We've even gone in groups of 100 at the same time. But as I said, we cannot pray as a group, not a minyan. We cannot bring with us a shofar. And Sukkot, we cannot carry on the Temple Mount a lulav or the fruits the spices that what we take on Sukkot. We cannot carry any religious object, including a Bible. You cannot carry a Magen David. We cannot carry a cross. You cannot carry oil. You cannot carry anything that is suspicious of being a religious item that is not Muslim. And these are things that have to change. There's no reason in the world why we cannot carry a prayer book on the Temple Mount and organize official minyanim. I just want to remind some people who are not aware, the Temple Mount is 25 times the size of the Western Wall Plaza. It's a gigantic place. There's enough room for everybody. There is no reason in the world why we cannot learn to share and to worship one God. There's one God. We believe in one God. Why shouldn't we not be able to worship together? And as you said, things have changed. We have seen changes, but a lot more things have to be changed. For instance, today, Muslims can go up to Temple Mount 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're not Muslim, it's only 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. There's only one gate you can enter from if you're not Muslim. There are 10 gates you can enter from if you are Muslim, and many other things that we see discrimination. But I do agree with you. I prefer seeing the positive, and the positive is that more and more Jews and tourists from all over the world come to visit the Temple Mount. In the past, they didn't come. And as I said, in 2019, we had 800,000. Just to compare, in 2014, we had 180,000. So we did see a growth in the number of people coming to visit Temple Mount. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and there's no reason why we should not see the change, just like the change, as Jared Kushner mentioned, the change that Muslims from all over the world will be able to come to pray on Temple Mount. So we should allow Jews and Christians and anybody who wants, any believer of the Bible who wants to pray, to worship God on the Temple Mount in his way, carrying with him anything he wants to, as long as he respects the others. And that's what I believe, basic human rights that we in the Western world believe in, based on the Bible.
Let's shift then to the reason that Jews and Christians call that place the Temple Mount, right? You referred already to the fact that in the scriptures, it's clear that King Solomon built the first temple there. Then obviously the second temple was built. And one of the things that's interesting, you'll recall, is a moment in the history of Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts. President Clinton was at Camp David and discussing the issues of sovereignty and religious freedom on the Temple Mount. And Yasser Arafat, in the year 2000 at Camp David, said that there was never a temple on that spot. And Bill Clinton, according to the historians and those who were in the room, got very angry. And he said, are you telling me that my Bible is wrong, that Jesus didn't walk in a temple that was in that spot? That was Arafat's position, and it is the position of a number of Palestinian leaders and activists today.
Yeah, so the Palestinians, till this very day, are not allowing any archaeological digging on the Temple Mount because they're afraid. And as you said, Bill Clinton slammed his hand on the table and told him if there's no temple, there was no Christianity. And he was really furious at Arafat at the time. I've heard that from several witnesses, that and the story is. And I think that this story represents exactly the story. But I think that, as you know, and I really want to commend you for what you did in the past 2 years in promoting peace in the region here. And you personally went to visit the Gulf and met with leadership. And I think it's a wonderful development where we see evangelical leaders going to the Arab world, the Muslim world, and telling them the time is for peace between nations. And we see things have been developed ever since Clinton's time. And we know that in the past few years, the United States of America has moved its embassy to Jerusalem. We know that more and more embassies are going to be opening up in Jerusalem in the near future. And things are changing. And if things are changing, the time is for the change on Temple Mount to be a more tolerant place. And I think that exclamation by Arafat, who thought that if he would say there was no temple, he could change history. And he would say there was no Jewish people, there won't be a Jewish people. And if he could say, by the way, throughout history, we know many people tried to say that there's no more Jewish people. But those who read the Bible know that God has a covenant, an eternal covenant with the Jewish people. And that's exactly why we are back here in the land. And God chose the people of Israel not for a national reason for the people of Israel, but as a source of blessing to all nations. That God said it to Abraham, he said it to Jacob, he repeated it. The reason God brings the blessing to Israel, that we should be a source of blessing to all nations. And we are extremely excited to be a source of blessing to nations that want to work with us, and they will all benefit from the worship working.
Let me ask you then this question then, which is something that's highly controversial, right? Highly controversial. I mean, your advocacy of praying on the Temple Mount, bringing prayer books and the Bible and so forth, you were nearly assassinated in 2014, as I understand, 4 shots to your chest by a Palestinian Islamist radical. You survived. You not only survived, you ended up being elected to the Knesset. But now, so clearly, this is a hot button issue, and at a time of peace, there's going to be a lot of Israeli leaders who are going to be very sensitive and not wanting to create new challenges, new flashpoints. But let's look forward a bit. I've been noticing polling, not much, but maybe I've missed some of it in the last 10 years, that is indicating a higher degree of Israeli Jewish interest in building the third temple than I think most people in the world, even most Christians, realize. Now, most Israelis are either traditional or even somewhat secular, not particularly religious. Most are not Orthodox. They're certainly not ultra-Orthodox. But this growing interest, first of all, is that accurate? Is there a growing interest? What type of polling have you seen? And where is the issue of building a third temple? Now, you have been a leading advocate of this.
So as I said, first of all, there are many different polls about what the Israeli society wants about Temple Mount. But I want to remind you that when the Zionist movement began in the end of the 19th century, it was a very small minority of Jews who were talking about establishing a state of Israel for the Jewish people. Herzl himself was not an observant Jew, and they led the revolution. And here we are today, and all the rest is history. And the same thing with the Temple Mount. Yes, and when I began going to Temple Mount in 1989, There were 100 Jews who went up to Temple Mount annually. It was of no interest. But I guess God has decided the time has come, because we see the mainstream of the Israeli society, the Likud party, many people, even from the blue and white and Derech Eretz parties, people go up to the Temple Mount. We see many people are growing interest in the Temple Mount. It means that the time is getting close. And the same thing we see in the non-Jewish world, in the Christian world. In the past, many of them would go to the Western Wall and they had no interest in the Temple Mount. And we see there's a growth in interest in the Temple Mount. But we have to understand, when we are talking about a third temple, people are afraid, who knows what's going to be. We're talking about a house of prayer for all nations. We're not talking about people you say, let's build a temple near the mosque. If you build a temple near the mosque, it's not going to be a temple, because a temple, it's not another church. We're not going to have a Catholic temple and a Protestant temple, an Evangelic temple, a Methodist temple, a Sunni temple, a Orthodox temple, a conservative or Reformed temple. It's not that way. The idea of a temple is the one place where all people can refer to as the palace of God. And just like the state of Israel, when it began, we were not very, very popular. But eventually, the United Nations and agreed about the establishment of the state of Israel. So too, what we are doing, the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation, we are trying to raise the awareness among the people of the need, and we hope that more and more people will demand, just like the campaign we're doing right now, let the shofar blow on Zion. We're calling people from all over the world to blow the shofar wherever you are, but to say that we want the shofar to be blown on Zion. And the concept is, we all can unite, even especially these years where this the year where we see the COVID-19, wherever you are, the technology can allow us to all unite. And I think we have an option of uniting for Zion. And the idea of building the third temple is not my idea. It's the idea of the prophecy. And the prophecy spoke about the Jewish people returning back home to the land of Israel, and it's been fulfilled. And the prophets talk about making peace between Israel and its neighbors, and it's being fulfilled. There's no reason why not to believe that the prophecy of Ezekiel, the prophecy of Zechariah, who talk about a temple which will be a house of prayer for all nations, as Isaiah speaks about, and Micha speak about, there is no reason not to believe that this will be fulfilled as well. And our goal as part of the peace in the region is not just a political event, it's more than that. It's a religious event. And I remember the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem, when we had a rabbi and a pastor speaking there and praying there, because the idea of Jerusalem is not a political issue. It's a humanitarian, religious, faithful issue. And therefore, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to raise the awareness. We're calling upon people.
Last question, just because of time. Yeah, I appreciate it. Just because of time, last question. There has been talk over the years through the organization called the Temple Institute, which you're very familiar with, that the architectural plans for a third temple are completed. What can you tell us? I mean, you're describing something that I think most people don't realize. I think you're describing something that's a little more potentially politically feasible, maybe still controversial, and that is some sort of facility on the Temple Mount where everybody could pray. But there are, of course, those who advocate what Ezekiel is really talking about, or what Jesus was speaking of, or Zechariah, of course, which is a house not only of prayer, but of sacrifice. And so those plans are already in motion, right? I mean, those things have been, those preparations are being made. Is that accurate?
I had the privilege of being the Director General of the Temple Institute for 5 years, between 2005 and 2009. Yes, the concept is, and also, people say sacrifice, and people are very, very scared. Who knows what a sacrifice is? I'm sure you've heard that there's some places in the world they celebrate Thanksgiving and they have a barbecue. And here in Israel on our Independence Day, people have what's called the mangal, where you go out and what is like a Passover offering is that everybody together stands and sings to God, celebrating with a roasted goat or sheep. What I do say is that we don't know what's going to be, but we do know what our goal is. And our goal, from my opinion, is that the most important vessel that needs to be built today is the heart of mankind. And that is the vessel that I am trying to build.
Great. Thank you so much. I wish you a happy season of holidays, and may we continue.
Shana Tova to all, and you're welcome to join in to shalomjerusalem.org.
Thank you so much.